Well, good morning, everybody. It is a treat to see all the names and organizations of our wonderfully involved state coming into the chat. For those who are just joining, as you can see, please put your name and affiliation into the chat. My name is UC Terrell. I work for the Carsey School of Public Policy at UNH in our Center for Impact Finance, and it is my pleasure to be able to facilitate these Coffee and Conversations. Coffee and Conversations is a discussion series jointly organized by Carsey, the State of New Hampshire Bureau of Education and Training, and the New Hampshire Association of Certified Public Managers to engage public service professionals in learning, problem solving, and collaboration. This discussion series has been going on for many years, as some of you know, first meeting in person at the UNH School of Law, which is where Will last joined us to present the earlier results of the results of an earlier survey. And like many institutions, we've been virtual since COVID. Towards 2024, we've been bouncing around some new ideas for how to keep this series webinar vibrant and engaging and relevant. So if you have ideas for things that you've liked, things that you haven't liked so much, directions that you think we could go, please let us know. We'll be rolling out some changes in the next couple of months. It is my pleasure to introduce today Will Stewart, who's Executive Director of Stay Work Play New Hampshire. Will has a long list of civic leadership and community contributions. First Vice President of Economic Development at the Greater Manchester Chamber and President of the Greater Londonderry Chamber of Commerce. More recently, you may have seen his yard signs as a mayoral candidate and as a long-standing Ward 2 alderman. I know, Will, I'm going back into your history here, but the founder, co-chair of Bike Manchester, a reporter for the Hippo. I always find that journalists ask the best questions, and now when you're in a position of being able to answer them and act on them, that's exciting. And long ago wrote an insider's guide to Manchester, which I have requested from the UNH Manchester library, though I understand some updates may be forthcoming. So Will is going to talk to us about the results of Stay Work Play's latest survey. As always, please put questions in the Q&A. And I'll be checking the chat also, but maybe a little bit less frequently. Feel free to put your questions in at the time. And Will, do you want me to read them as they come in or maybe wait till the end?
Thank you so much, UC. I very much appreciate it. Let's get this going from the beginning. So as UC said, my name is Will Stewart, and I'm the Executive Director of Stay Work Play New Hampshire, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a statewide nonprofit whose mission is the attraction and retention of young people. And here today, I'm very excited to share this recent survey data that was collected, earlier this year, looking at, why young people stay in New Hampshire and why they might leave. And this is really foundational for our organization, certainly, whose mission is to attract and retain these young people, to know why they're doing it, on both of those ends, and ultimately, as UC kind of alluded to, what we can do about it. And I know this is information that I think can also be helpful to a number of different organizations, academic, corporate, government as well, because we all have a vested interest in having more people here in New Hampshire and more young people in particular. And before I jump in, I just want to, say a little bit about why, this is important. Some of you may know that, and kind of why Stay Work Play exists to begin with. And we were founded about 13, 14 years ago, back in 2009. Looking at the demographic challenges that New Hampshire faces. Some of you may know that New Hampshire is the second oldest state in the country, where Maine is number one. We're tied with Vermont for number two. So we have a kind of a demographic challenge here in northern New England. But here in New Hampshire, it's a little bit more concerning, because not only are we the second oldest state by average age, but we also have one of the lowest unemployment rates. This was true before COVID. It's certainly true now, still under 3%, which is pretty much saying that everybody who wants a job has a job. And I don't have to tell any of you who are employers or even read the news, how challenging, the labor market is, and, that employers, again, across all sectors are having trouble finding the people they need. Kind of compounding that, the triple threat, the perfect storm here, also is that New Hampshire has the distinction of being the #1 exporter of high school graduates who want a 4-year degree. So, for those young people who are pursuing their bachelor's, about two out of three leave the state, every year to pursue that education. Some of them come back, but a lot of them don't. So it's a long way of saying, again, that we need people in general. We need young people in particular. That's why Stay Work Play exists, and it's why we really work to collect data that I'm going to be sharing with you today, the highlights thereof. Because while Stay Work Play is a statewide organization, we're a small one. We're a full-time staff of 2 with a budget of about $200,000. 100% nonprofit. Funded by primarily by the private sector, and a little bit of academia. Thank you to UNH and the university system for their support of Stay Work Play. But it's a long way of saying that we have very limited resources, and for our mission, we need to be laser focused on what matters, and for that we need data. So let's jump right in. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the sponsors of this survey, including the University System of New Hampshire, Fidelity Investments, New Hampshire Housing, and Dartmouth Health. And I will say that this survey was conducted by the St. Anselm College Survey Center in January 2023. It is a statistically valid survey with a margin of error of, I believe, 3.8%. And I'll say that if there are any fellow data nerds out there, I would highly encourage you to check out the full report. You can really dig right into all the good crosstabs, and you can find that 100+ page report at stateworkplay.org/survey. But today, happy to kind of talk about the highlights and answer any questions that you might have. So let's jump in. So this is probably the kind of the big takeaway slide from the survey overall. And what it really shows is that when it comes to satisfaction of life in New Hampshire, that there's really a peak and valley effect with young people. And when I say young people, we're talking 20 to 40, ages 20 to 40, and that is quite an age range that you'll keep in mind that what's important to you in your early 20s and what you prioritize is probably a little bit different than what's important and what you prioritize in your late 30s. And again, this is where a lot of the great information and distinctions can be made in the crosstabs of that data. But today we're looking at the entire spectrum, 20 to 40, young people living in New Hampshire in January 2023. So what we found is that overall, young people in their early 20s, are pretty satisfied, with life in New Hampshire. This is a point in their lives where if they're not in school, they're likely, living at home, maybe under the kind of protection of their families. They're not paying things like, maybe, mortgages, might not be paying rent, certainly not paying property taxes, but they get to enjoy all that New Hampshire has to offer, and life in New Hampshire for them is pretty good. But that satisfaction does begin to slip as they get a little bit older in their mid-20s and early 30s. You really kind of hits that valley, when young people might be in their, kind of second, maybe third jobs, they're paying rent, maybe they're thinking about starting a family, and you're trying to, maybe buy a house. They look around and kind of say, I don't know, this, life in New Hampshire is really, really hard. But then that satisfaction begins to climb up again in their mid to late 30s. Once people by that time, statistically speaking, are more likely to be a little bit more established in their careers and their lives. Maybe they have that house, their kids are in school. You look around and say, life in New Hampshire is pretty good once again. So let's dip a little bit into to some of the specifics here. This is a concerning slide. And again, this kind of follows up, we're making comparisons in this presentation today to the first survey that Stay Work Play did back in 2017, and December of 2017. And as UC said, came and shared this in the spring of 2018. And again, that was kind of benchmark. And I'll preface everything I say by noting that kind of the plan at that time was really to do this survey every 3 years. So we did it in December 2017. The plan at that time was to do it in December 2020. Of course, we recognized, though, that if we were to start collecting data in 2020 of all years, that data would probably be a bit skewed. So we decided to wait until things were kind of semi back to, mostly normal, which is why we went ahead back to it this year. But also worth noting that, one of the things we see here throughout the data, and that really, we've seen nationwide and even globally, is kind of a greater sense of pessimism, just generally speaking. And so we know that that's infused the data that we're seeing here today. What we don't know is the extent, to which it's impacting, this data. But as we're seeing here in this slide, promoters, what we call promoters, have declined. Those, that's when we ask, the pollsters ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied with your life in New Hampshire? How likely are you to recommend New Hampshire to friends or family members as a place to live? And that's, scale of 1 to 10. If you answer 9 or 10, you're a super promoter. If you're 7 or 8, you're kind of passive, or at least kind of meh. And then your detractors, 6 and under. So we've seen those numbers slip. The number of promoters have declined, as you can see, since 2017. Again, a bit concerning. We also see that key quality of life traits have declined, and we'll jump into a little bit these in more detail in the coming slides. But it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive here. Basically, the higher, the taller the bar graphs here, the more negatively people view these particular quality of life traits here in New Hampshire. So the things that kind of have that are going down, under the line: recreation, safety, outdoors environment. Those things are viewed positively, and more positively than in 2017. People are appreciating these things more, whereas those, kind of going all the way up on the right-hand side to nightlife, are viewed more negatively than they were in 2017. And that's another trend that we've seen in this data, is that, really, kind of the pandemic has kind of calcified people's opinions. Things that even previously they saw as good and positives, they now see as more positive. Things that they saw as negative in 2017, they now see as more negative. What we, silver linings, though, that we're seeing, that those what we call stayers, have increased. Those who are more likely, to move out of New Hampshire, who say they're likely to move out of New Hampshire within the next 2 years, that number has increased a little bit. But those who say they are unlikely to move has also increased. And more interestingly, those who are unsure, as you can see, that number has dropped dramatically. Where we saw that nearly a fifth of people said they were unsure, 5 years ago, now it's, dwindled to about 5%. So again, things are being calcified. Another example of that. This is, for me, one of the most, brightest lights of this entire survey. Given where we started in 2017, those of you who were in any of those presentations might recall us talking about something called the loneliness factor. And in 2017, 1 out of 5 respondents said they did not have a single friend in close proximity to them, which is super depressing. It's sad if somebody doesn't have friends near them, but it's also concerning from an employment standpoint. If your employees don't have friends, they're probably not hanging out grabbing a beer with anybody after work, or going to yoga on Saturday with somebody, or watching the game on Sunday. And they're that much more likely to leave, to go back to either where their friends and family are, if they're not from here originally, or to leave to go to an area where they think it would be easier to make friends. So that number, those numbers, as you can see, have decreased quite a bit, since 2017. And we're still kind of digging in. We're talking today about kind of the what, and what we're exploring now is the why and the how. These numbers have changed a little bit. So this is a kind of another representation of that peak and valley effect that I mentioned with regard to how young people view life in New Hampshire, how they feel about life in New Hampshire, and it kind of breaks it down across that that 20 to 40 spectrum in those 5-year increments. And again, as you can see, basically green and yellow equal good, orange and red equal bad, which is to say satisfied or not satisfied on that kind of spectrum. And you can see those the good numbers are definitely higher. The yellows and greens are higher, early 20s, late 30s, and they dip in the mid 20s to mid 30s, whereas the bad, the red and orange, the unsatisfied numbers go up in that middle range there. So this is, when we shared the bar graph earlier about the kind of those key quality of life traits, we ask about them specifically, how does New Hampshire compare, to other places, when it comes to things like in this case, environment, safety, taxes, and community. And what we saw here is that, these particular traits that New Hampshire respondents believe, 83%, for example, believe that the environment here in New Hampshire is better than other places. 78% believe that when it comes to safety, 64% taxes. And I should note that there is a distinction that we'll talk about a little bit later when it comes to sales tax, the sales tax environment versus the property tax environment, and how people feel about those things in the different age ranges too is telling, in my opinion. And then community, 60% believe it's better here than elsewhere. Starts to get a little bit more depressing when we go to the next slide here. They said that New Hampshire believe that respondents believe that New Hampshire is worse or about the same as other places when it comes to things like schools. 53% say it's worse or about the same here, and it just kind of, as you can see, kind of keeps getting a little bit more concerning. Healthcare, colleges, affordable housing. Some of these things are no surprise. I know some are more surprising than others. But housing affordability shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Diversity, certainly not. Childcare, as UC and I were talking about before we began, a much bigger concern now, especially even though compared to 2017 for the respondents. And public transportation. Again, New Hampshire not exactly known for its robust public transit network. When it comes to work here in the Granite State, another thing that's certainly of concern to stay, work, play. How does New Hampshire fare relative to other places for quality of jobs and career opportunities? I think, kind of the scientific term, I've heard here is meh. We're just kind of meh. 42% believe that it's better here in New Hampshire, 35% believe that it's worse, and about a quarter, 23% believe that it's about the same. So, no real, compelling or indicative number, one way or the other. When it comes to jobs and quality career opportunities here in the state. On the play side, however, as you might imagine, again, perhaps no surprise, New Hampshire does pretty well. Again, I think that's a reason why not just young people, but a lot of us, live here in New Hampshire and stay here in New Hampshire, is that, the access to, kind of the quality outdoor recreational amenities that we have here in the state. And this is where, the strongest numbers that we've seen in the survey, 86% say the outdoors in general, better here in New Hampshire than other places, and 75% for our recreational opportunities. They say when it comes to, where we're worse or about the same, again, get a little bit more concerning here. Retail restaurants, again, kind of another meh number. 53% say we're worse or about the same. Culture, 80% say it's probably better elsewhere. Social life, 82% say it's worse here or about the same. And nightlife, again, perhaps no surprise that 88% say it's worse or about the same than other places. So I won't go line by line on here, but again, kind of talking about the characteristics by age group that we've seen. And again, all of this is available in the crosstabs of the report at stayworkplay.org/survey. But a few things to call out that are at least kind of interesting to me. I always like looking at numbers of respondents to see who's native to New Hampshire and who's not. And again, it's about half and half, which was about the same as we saw in 2017 with 53%, a slight majority being from away, being not New Hampshire natives. We saw that 16% identified as students. 73% said they were employed, with 13% being self-employed. Interesting. One big thing when it came to work and commute, you'll see down here toward the end, 20% said they have no commute at all, which speaks from that work from home environment. And of course, again, perhaps no surprise that number has increased pretty dramatically since 2017. But it really speaks to I think an opportunity that we have here in New Hampshire to attract those types of workers, but also again, UC and I earlier were talking about infrastructure as it relates to things like childcare and broadband that can support things like this as well. living situation, we found that 60% are living with a spouse and partner, 11% with roommates, 13% alone, and 17% with parents or family. And that's about where it was in 2017 as well. Again, speaking, I think, a lot to the housing affordability issues and just scarcity that we see here in New Hampshire. And likewise, you can see down below at the bottom, 12% say they neither rent nor own, which says that I think part of that living with parents and family, just not paying any rent at all. So the last couple of slides that I want to leave you with, kind of one of these fun little word clouds that we just kind of ask, open association, why would you leave New Hampshire? And give us your one-word answers. And as you can see, the biggest, of course, the more frequently somebody gave a word, the bigger it is here on the word cloud. Also, opportunity, as you can see, is the biggest reason people cited for potentially leaving New Hampshire, followed by taxes. And again, we talked about earlier about the difference between property taxes and sales taxes. And this certainly plays out in the crosstabs where, those in their early 20s, again, probably not paying property taxes, view the tax environment here in New Hampshire as great. However, those in their late 30s, where you're more likely to be paying property taxes, have a much more negative view of the tax environment here in the state. Another thing that I'll point out is that, we have a number of terms here that, as you can see, that kind of in the aggregate point to meteorological weather-related terms. The word weather itself here toward the top, but also things like cold and snow, ice, things like that, that in the aggregate really point to kind of the challenges that we face from our wintertime climate, which not everyone likes. And then finally, why do you stay? We asked. And as you can see here, it doesn't take, you don't need your glasses to see that family is the #1 reason, why people stay in New Hampshire. And again, perhaps not a surprise, families, keep you rooted, to where you are. You have those connections, those familial connections, that keep you, in a community and in a state. But of course, that's not the only one. You can see a number of other things here, some more amusing than others, in my opinion. But family far and away is what keep people rooted, young people rooted in New Hampshire. So that, I know, was a very, very fast, overview of the data that Stay Work Play, commissioned, and it was collected back in January 2023. And happy to entertain any questions that folks might have. I will stop sharing my slides.
Thank you so much, Will. That was great. Personally, I consider myself a stay work play demographic, but I'm not anymore. And so it's really interesting to look back on
me both, you see.
My own. I have relatives buried in the Peterborough church, and but I was born in California. I consider myself a multi-generational boomerang. And I remember when I did Leadership New Hampshire, hearing the idea that in a way these boomerangs represent a New Hampshire success story, in that the young people can move out of state and then in some cases come back as they get established. And I'm wondering, this survey it's hard to track those who are moving in as well as the reasons for those who actually have left. But your thoughts on boomerangs, and if those are increasing, decreasing, staying the same?
It's hard to say, and I think I saw Dr. Ken Johnson in the in the audience today, and I remember some of his work that came out just a couple of years ago was showing that New Hampshire is seeing an increase, a net in migration of young people in their 20s and 30s, which is and it's modest, as I recall, and Dr. Johnson can chime in, but in that 3,000 to 4,000, 4,500 a year, but definitely beats the out migration that we were seeing in kind of the great recession up through 2015, 2016. What we don't, what I haven't been able to find the data source for anyway is reasons for that. And folks, when it comes to domestic migration, did they start here in their lives or have some kind of New Hampshire touch point, or was it just completely unconnected previously. I will say that, at Stay Work Play, our mission, of course, is to, as I mentioned, attract and retain, young people. Probably a disproportionate amount of our work and effort is on retention. Kind of the old, like they say in sales, it's easier to keep an existing customer than to attract a new one. And that's certainly true. And it's also a question for us of resources. And I mentioned kind of our limited resources and bandwidth, both staff and financial. So that's kind of been, where we've been focusing our efforts. I say all that to say that, our attraction efforts, to the extent that we're able to engage in that, is focused on those boomerangs, those people who, start out here and who might one day boomerang back. And you're right, I think that, that's easier, I think, than connecting, trying to attract somebody from, Sacramento or Fargo or, Dallas, who, let's be honest, may or may not be able to find New Hampshire on a map, to be able to find those, to have a connection here, whether they grew up here and might be enticed to come back, especially when they start having kids. And that, again, I believe I'm citing Dr. Johnson's data, that, when those people move back, they're statistically more likely to do it in that early 30s when they're thinking about settling down and, again, wanting to be close to family. And New Hampshire schools are a lot more attractive and, sense of community and safety, as opposed to, when you're at a point in your life where you want things, you value things more like nightlife and social life. That's a long way of saying that, and you bring back those boomerangs also bring back skills and connections they've gotten in different parts of the country and world, which in my case, in my opinion, make New Hampshire a much richer, vibrant place, to be when you have people with experiences from all over.
Right, and Ken is on the call. He says his connection is not great, so will not be Hollywood Square here, but he says that New Hampshire is receiving a net inflow of adults in their 30s and 40s. And again, Carsey and especially Ken have done a ton of work on this. I'll just read an excerpt from one of his reports. New Hampshire is often characterized as a place where residents' lineage goes back generations, but in fact, we have one of the most mobile populations in the country. Only 41% of the state's residents were born here, which is far less than the average across New England at 54%, or the average for all states, which is 57%. So among those over 25, only about a third were born in the state. So that really gets to what you're referring to also. Another, I think it was a report by Jess Carson and Sarah Bogie around COVID era movers to the Northern Forest region. And we had a big influx across the 4 states of the Northern Forest right after COVID or during COVID, not so much for fear of infection, but folks who were considering making the move to this lifestyle, and COVID kind of gave them the kick in the butt to actually do it. And they found that while higher income residents can bring new resources, there's also the risk of intensifying pressure on local workers and residents because of housing or demand for other expensive services. And so I wonder if there's this vicious cycle almost, as we are on one hand getting the in-migration and on the other stressing an already stressed system.
I think there's definitely a tension there. And, I kind of, joke, kind of half seriously and half in jest that sometimes I almost feel guilty, for doing, what I do and what Stay Work Play does. Because, believe me, I love to talk about what a great place New Hampshire is to stay, to live, to work, to play, to raise a family, to recreate, to do all of these things. New Hampshire is such a great place. But it's like, if you can afford it. And, that's kind of the challenge that we face here in New Hampshire. And, you see, as you and I were talking about previously, that, look, New Hampshire, we need all the people we can get, period. We need all the young people we can get in particular, to fill those roles, particularly as the baby boomer generation kind of, is retiring en masse, and we need to fill those roles, community, employment, and otherwise, but, we don't have the infrastructure to support it. Housing in particular, childcare for those on the younger end of the spectrum, and even things like you talk about Northern Forest, and there are even places farther to the south that just don't have, like the broadband, for example, infrastructure to be able to support work from home and even just streaming Netflix. So it's a big, kind of tension that we face. And you're right, the more attractive we are, the more people come in, the more buying power they might have. If you're selling your home in Connecticut, for example, and you can come up here and pay cash, and it, drives up already high prices, and, for homes and rents and things like that. So it's a conundrum and not an easy one to solve. We just, when it comes to housing in particular and childcare and broadband, like, we just need more.
It's interesting. I'm reading a comment from Stephanie, who I believe was at Mega Foods in Manchester. And she writes, during the pandemic, our company became much more open to hiring remote employees. We continue to embrace this remote workplace, not making employees come to the office, but it's taken a toll on employee connection and belonging, further exacerbating what we've already seen in the results of the survey. So she writes, how do we encourage new employees to the area when there is a crunch on affordable housing, which is just what we've been talking about and what you do? And to me, the aha here is not only that people are moving to New Hampshire because they can work remotely somewhere else, but possibly that people are not moving to Manchester-based companies because also to New Hampshire-based companies because they can work from all over the country.
It's a double-edged sword. I think that, for New Hampshire residents and New Hampshire employers, I mean, certainly with, those that are able to offer work from home opportunities, I mean, their talent pool has expanded, greatly, nationally and globally, to find the people, they need, and conversely, like you said, that, New Hampshire residents here can likewise work and receive income from companies across the country and across the world. When it comes to, I think what employers, and they often, ask us at Stay Work Play, well, what can we do? How can, like, we're in competition now with everybody, as if they weren't, they were certainly previously, pre-COVID, but especially now. And, one of my pieces of advice is, that employers just have to, be a lot more active, on these issues that affect their ability to attract and retain employees, housing, being chief among them, but again, also things like, childcare and transportation and all of these things that, I mean, we talked earlier about the Great Recession and, how we saw that out-migration of young people at that time. And, companies back then, if they had a job opening, they could, throw a link online and just be flooded with resumes. And, that's just not the case anymore. And so, I think we're starting to see, Stay Work Play, we do, nonpartisan issues-based advocacy in Concord on things like housing and childcare, to name two. And we're starting to see, and we encourage, employers to join us, to be able to talk about and share those stories, because it's in their best interest, and they have to get more involved and, more than just what happens within the confines of their office, but they have to start looking at the environment that they're in the community and the state, and, recognize that, it's going to take all of us to move the needle, but it's not going to happen quickly.
I'm bringing up another report of Ken's. You can see in the chat that he's sharing some of the reasons that people stay. This was a recent report by Ken and Christine Bunshu on retaining residents is important to New Hampshire's future. Why do people stay? And that's it. It's more in line, I think, with your survey, Will, where it's not as much focusing on those that have left or have come in, but if on an average year 56,000 people move here and 46,000 residents leave, why do these 1.3 million New Hampshire residents choose not to leave? So this is a representative sample of over 3,000 residents, and just similar to your survey, people are likely to report staying in the state for economic reasons, the physical environment, family, and the social atmosphere. And it's not just one of those, it's really the interconnectedness of why any of us root in a community.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. And, I think it's also, instructive. And, I always look for, data like this. I mean, it's interesting, I think from an intellectual standpoint to look at it and talk about it. And, but I'm always looking from Stay Work Play's perspective is, how is it actionable? How can we use this information and this data, to make decisions to achieve the goals that we want to achieve? And, for me, it's, one of the things that, I think a past mistake was for New Hampshire was trying to be everything to everybody. And I think that's a fool's errand. We don't have the money, and we don't have the, we can't back it up. We talk about, like, just to point out, a piece of data from our survey, 88% say, nightlife here in New Hampshire is worse or about the same than other places. Like, for us to be able to say, come to New Hampshire for the nightlife, I mean, that's silly. And I mean, people would get here and realize that it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and that would hurt our further efforts. So to be able to to narrow in both on the survey data here and those that Carsey and Dr. Johnson are putting together, but kind of the overlapping Venn diagram of people who are everybody needs a job, certainly in employment, but also who value the outdoor recreational amenities, who also value the K-12 school system and sense of safety. Like, that's not going to be everybody. Like, if you're not into the outdoors, not to say there's nothing to do for you here in New Hampshire, but if we're going to invest our limited resources into trying to attract people, to my mind, it makes sense to focus on people who value those things that we're strong at. Well, certainly we need to improve things like housing and childcare and transportation, but when it comes to those kind of quality of life amenities, let's focus on people who value what we have.
Right. Build on our strengths.
Yeah.
In our earlier conversation, you and I talked about how Stay Work Play is is a nonpartisan organization, and really is trying to work to lift up all residents and the communities here. You might avoid this lightning rod, but I wonder your thoughts on education, because New Hampshire does have such a strong educational history in terms of the achievement compared to other states in the country. There's a lot of turmoil in public education right now. Does Stay Work Play have a stance on that in terms of how it would affect the tendencies of younger people, of young families, to stay or play here?
I'll caveat it by saying that our board has not taken a position on any particular bills as it relates to to these types of issues, but generally speaking, we are concerned about these types of issues, the so-called divisive concepts laws, the voucher money that kind of drains, in my personal opinion, money away from public education. And really, I think all of these things in the aggregate serve to erode New Hampshire's traditional high standing when it comes to K-12 schools. And we're seeing this across the country, so it's not like it's a uniquely New Hampshire challenge, but it is playing out here, and certainly relative to some of our surrounding states as well. So looking at it kind of through both relative and objective terms, it's concerning. Again, New Hampshire Stay Work Play is not weighted in as a policy priority at this point, but it is something that we're watching very closely, for sure.
Want to switch to the play bucket of Stay Work Play. And as you said, we're never going to attract people for whom nightlife is premier. But there's a lot of focus on recreation and outdoor recreation. We know that the younger generation tends to be civically involved in some ways, certainly towards social and environmental justice, or towards getting involved. And yet the Civic Health Index from 2020 found some interesting things. Millennials, so those born between 81 and 96, are less likely in general to be civically engaged and to vote. That that there's a increasing mistrust of our neighbors. So New Hampshire's trust in their neighbors has declined, and in particular, those 18 to 34-year-olds trust their neighbors less than other age groups. We find that the millennials are engaging through posting online and through volunteering, but there's a long list where millennials demonstrate lower rates than other generations in voting and paying attention to news, trusting, helping, connecting with neighbors, going to public meetings, feeling they matter in their community. And, and the list goes on there. So, it's a different type of play, but it's a way of engaging and feeling connected in the social landscape as well as in the physical landscape. And I wonder, are we measuring the right things to capture how this group engages in the first place? If we see these declines, And to your point of moving to action from data, what can we do to have this aspect of life really support the 20 to 40-year-olds?
Well, I can tell you that all of those data points and that you mentioned are concerning, and I think that they're certainly playing out here in New Hampshire as they are across the country. I mean, kind of the 25 years ago, the Robert Putnam's bowling alone. Just generally speaking, how people are less civically engaged. They're not joining the bowling leagues. I was presenting to a Rotary Club a couple of months ago that had like 10 people there. And this was, older, Granite Staters as well. So we're seeing it play out across the board, but, certainly with the millennial and Gen Z, have, less opportunities and are less inclined to get together, I think in person, given the rise of the internet and a number of other factors. And it's sometimes it's not as easy, I think, as it was for previous generations too, for a lot of the life demands, that are out there, job and otherwise. I will say that it's hard, I think, for a lot of young people, to get involved. And a lot of people, have that, that desire to do it, but don't know where to begin. Some I think are waiting to be asked, to get involved. And one of our things here at Stay Work Play New Hampshire, when we came out in 2017 with, I mentioned that loneliness factor, that 1 out of 5 reporting that they didn't have a single friend nearby. And that was kind of really a wake up call, for us, recognizing that, hey, as a state, we need to do a much better job of connecting, young people, to each other, certainly, but to their communities, to the regions, ultimately to the state. And so kind of one of our focus areas, and I think it, hopefully will play out, long term, is, getting young people, connected to volunteer opportunities, to nonprofits, to all of, and, certainly, civic, whether as, in elected office or, working in public policy realms or anything to kind of feed that desire, which we know they have, to make a difference in their communities, but kind of connecting the dots, for them and helping, make those opportunities materialize. And, we can't just wait for it to happen. I mean, I think the culture from our society at large, is one that's, kind of trended from, more community oriented to more, individualistic. And that's not helpful. And in fact, it's detrimental to a place like New Hampshire, where we run pretty lean and we are so reliant, on the nonprofit sector, on volunteers in our communities being able to step up to staff everything from, not just Rotary clubs and conservation commissions and planning boards, but even volunteer fire departments and, things that, have life safety effects. So, it's a long way of saying that it's on Stay Work Play's radar. It's something that we're working with, young people's groups, across the state. And again, we talked about employers getting involved, more. Is, I always encourage employers to, like, you don't want to be all up in your employees' business, certainly, but I think we all have a vested interest in getting our employees and our younger employees in particular, kind of rooted in their communities. So being able to ask, hey, what are you into? Are you into, community theater? Are you into kickball? Are you, what is your thing? And then helping them, get connected. I think it will help longevity, at places of employment, but also in the community and the state, long term. We need to do a much better job of getting people connected and connected faster, when they get here.
Absolutely. I'm thinking back to Stephanie's comment about the remote employees, and even if folks have the ability to work remotely, get together for a kickball league, as you said, or to volunteer at Gather or another food pantry, to build that social connection. I also think of all the moving civic opportunities that happen at town hall meetings, and how do we get that information and those on-ramps to people who aren't attending the meetings.
Yeah, we just have to be very intentional.
Right. Two great comments. Jada writes that research in other states shows that previous vacation experiences play a significant role in retirees' decision to move to certain places. And so, similarly, this might be an important factor with the 20 to 40-year-olds. Many younger people that she talks to say, I used to visit my grandparents here in the summer, or they have that nostalgia connection to this place.
Yeah, and it's something that we definitely, want to capitalize on, knowing that you're right, people coming here to visit family in the summer, maybe they came to summer camp here. And again, it's, I would almost include the include these types of folks in a boomerang campaign too. Maybe they didn't grow up here, but they have some type of connection, to New Hampshire, and some type of warm fuzzy feeling, that we'd like to capitalize on. And for a number of years, Stay Work Play, we had a display in the visitor center, the Welcome Center on I-93 South, at around the Hooksett Tolls. And this is a place where people who would they'd be leaving the lakes, the mountains, driving back home to Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, points south, be able to stop there and to be able to make the case there. It's like, hey, you just enjoyed a week in New Hampshire, a weekend in New Hampshire. You can enjoy a lifetime, and here are all the opportunities that are here. So being able to capitalize in that moment, while it's certainly while they're in the state and it's top of mind, but for us, also how do we reach those other folks who had that touch point at some point in their lives, and maybe it was they went 4 years at UNH, and that was really kind of how Stay Work Play came to be a number of years ago, and something called the 55% Initiative, which is kind of our precursor organization that we wanted to see to increase the number of college graduates who stayed in New Hampshire 12 months post-graduation, to increase from 50 to 55%. So kind of looking on all fronts, to people who have those connections to New Hampshire to get them to either stay or come back. Boomerang.
Right. I'm laughing to imagine the sign on the highway or in the visitor center, with our 18 miles of coastline, capturing all those who went to Maine for their vacation. We have some good comments from Beverly encouraging us to look at libraries as especially if we resource them better, to be a more effective hub for play, and recognizing that the nightlife seems a lot more vibrant than when she was young. So other places do seem to be building here.
And I'll a couple of responses if I can. I'll say that libraries were not included in the study. But I'm a trustee at the Manchester City Library and a big proponent of libraries, so I'm all in favor of that. And I do think she brings up a good point about whether it's nightlife or anything else, that and this is kind of our big appeal to and messaging toward potential boomerangers, is that, like, if you went to college here, say, and you graduated, or you're 22, 23, you leave to go back where you came from or to get a job at somewhere else in the country or world, and that if you haven't been back to New Hampshire, say, in 10 years, New Hampshire's changed a lot, certainly in the last decade, the last few decades. It is more vibrant, and again, not to say that there's a club on every corner in every town, but nightlife is a little bit more vibrant. Our downtowns, I mean, go to Concord, go to Littleton, go to Portsmouth, go to Manchester, go to Nashua. I mean, these places are all a lot more vibrant, than they were 10, certainly 20 years ago, all across the board. And I think a lot of people, who maybe had spent a little bit of time in any of those places, or a lot of places in New Hampshire, would be surprised, come back and look around and, oh, wow, what happened here? This is kind of cool. And again, we're not going to appeal to everybody, but to the people who appreciate what we have, sometimes they just need to be informed and better educated as to, New Hampshire's not the way you left it, 10, a dozen, 20 years ago.
That's right. And it's interesting to look back to the roots of Stay Work Play as an organization, looking at that transition from college to post-college. Some more statistics for our room here from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. Back in 2019, over 61% of our high school graduates who are heading to college leave New Hampshire to pursue a 4-year degree. So that's the only state in the country where over 60% of degree-seeking students leave, more than double the national average. And the report says the primary long-term risk associated with these students leaving the state to pursue a 4-year degree elsewhere is that they may choose not to return. So that's what you're getting at. On the flip side, I thought it was interesting to see that of the total number of first-year students enrolled in 4-year colleges and universities in New Hampshire, only 38% were New Hampshire residents. So that, if you hit 50%, if you hit 55% of them staying, that's already an in-migration for students who are staying here at that young age.
Yeah, and I think that that speaks overall, and this is another one of Stay Work Play's priorities, as it relates to funding of higher education here in New Hampshire. that both at the university system and the community college system, like New Hampshire, we are dead last. We're number one in the percentage of high school students that we export out of state to pursue higher education, and it shouldn't be any surprise that we're dead last. We're 50th when it comes to per capita investment in the higher education system, and that even if we doubled it here in New Hampshire, we'd still be dead last. So I mean, that's a long way of saying that New Hampshire, higher education in New Hampshire is expensive, because the state does not invest in it. So we shouldn't be surprised when young people, certainly everybody's cost conscious, now more than ever, and that they're going to leave the state. And when you can go out of state and pay more, or I should say pay less in out of state tuition and fees than you could pay for in-state tuition in some places here in New Hampshire, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that they're going. And so, to my mind, if we really want to retain more on the front end, when in my opinion, it's easier, we need to do a lot better job of investing, in our higher education system here in New Hampshire. That's one thing that what I think have one of the fastest and most effective ways of doing just that.
I want to turn it to our audience again, and there's nothing in the Q&A right now, and there have been some great comments. I see that there's a range of participants here. We have folks from economic development, from recreation, from health services, and from business. And in the spirit of moving from data to action, you all might have questions that are more targeted towards action than I know to ask Will. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat or Q&A. We have long known that it's an issue to keep and to bring in and retain young people in New Hampshire, and it's a very tricky, complicated environment to do so. But it's the little actions that will add up that each of us can play. Well, I wanted to ask you about immigrants in particular, which, as Dr. Johnson's report show, that number is large. It's growing over the years, and particularly in our urban areas. Does Stay Work Play try to connect with these new groups in specific? Do you have ideas on ways to integrate immigrants into the workforce more effectively, so that they also are contributing to New Hampshire and staying in this way that's consistent with the mission of the organization?
Certainly, we recognize that New Hampshire is, I mean, we're still a very white state, but to your point, we are diversifying certainly more rapidly in our urban areas. And again, to go back to kind of the whole thesis of Stay Work Play is like, we need more people, period. And so one of our policy priorities here at Stay Work Play is making New Hampshire a more welcoming, inclusive, and just place for everybody, people of color, immigrants and refugees, in particular. So, for us, and we're looking at that through kind of a state policy lens, but we're also talking to our employer partners, too, who fund us and who we kind of they help us and we help them with actionable advice. And one of those is working with them to make their workplaces more inclusive and to do more outreach. To be, again, intentional. New Hampshire can't afford, perhaps like we once could in decades past, of just being here and having people flocking to us for our jobs and everything else. That we need to be a lot more intentional of welcoming people, of reaching out to them. I think that applies to both getting young people more involved civically, and it involves as it applies to reaching out to new immigrant populations here in the state, to invite them in. We can't just throw out the job description and hope that people apply. That we need to be a lot more proactive in doing this, reaching out to these communities, to their representatives, finding out what their needs are, and then how we can assist them to first be more stable in their lives here in New Hampshire, and then helping them meet those secondary needs of helping them to thrive here. And again, that's just it increases our workforce, it increases the potential number of people who can be civically involved, and again help us with all the empty roles that we need filled, here in the state. So there's nothing but upside.
Right. It makes me think again of on-ramps and how community colleges have played such a tremendous role in for young people and for folks who are retooling to engage in the new economy in New Hampshire. And so for different groups, what are the types of on-ramps, whether it is really employment and skill specific or broader support to help, in this case, new American communities integrate with the civic and economic life of the state. I have I think this comment just went to hosts and panelists from Kate. So I'm going to read it out loud. She's in the Recreation Management and Policy program here at UNH and writes that some preliminary findings from conversations with high school students in New Hampshire about their plans for the future include that the current housing situation here is discouraging to planning to stay, and these are high school students. Additionally, some participants have commented on the divide between themselves and the older generations. There isn't much overlap and opportunity for interaction or engagement, and they are not feeling heard in their communities. These perceptions have the potential to be damaging, and there is a lot of commentary around costs of tuition as well. So these are the high school students. For the generational divide, is that just, the same generational divide that is repeating, or is it somehow different or bigger?
I don't have data to say definitively one way or the other. I mean, I think there always have been generational, divides. And, I always go back to, the kind of comment, I think it was Will Rogers who said, every generation thinks that the generation coming behind it is taking this country to hell in a handbasket, but we haven't gotten there yet. That said,
or have we? No.
But yeah, I mean, it is real, certainly. And, here in New Hampshire, again, I think it's more pronounced because, again, we have we're the state with the oldest average, age, here in New Hampshire. So, proportionally, there are more people on that end, and there we have young people here too, of course, but, the divide is more. Certainly when you look at like our state legislature, I think is a great example. It's the oldest average legislature in the country. So the people who are, making these policy decisions as it relates to, the cost of, college, here in New Hampshire, or any other type of land use issues or childcare subsidies, or, you name it. I mean, it's just, people whose life experiences in those realms are much, further afield than, perhaps in other policymakers in other states, just statistically speaking. So I think that creates that divide and it kind of exacerbates it, in that way. Right.
I remember the Civic Health Index saying that the older cohorts, the older generations are have much lower rates of engagement with different races or classes or with people who are different than them. And so if you combine that with the younger generations, increasing mistrust or just disconnect from their neighbors or from others who are outside of their friend group, that is going in the wrong direction. Ken asks a question that maybe you and I could benefit from, Will. Why is the cutoff in stay, work, play at age 40? People in their 40s and 50s still have years of work life ahead of them and can contribute to New Hampshire socially, economically, and intellectually. And it's interesting, too, if you look at nationally, how these milestones of getting older, full-time work, financial independence, home independent of parents, marriage, children, those are all moving later as well. So how do we choose our upper end?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and you're right. As someone in my my mid 40s, I can certainly appreciate it. Certainly, I will say that kind of that 40 age group is I don't know if it's arbitrary, semi arbitrary, but it does seem to be kind of a cutoff for groups nationally, as for whatever reason. I don't know. Is it relative? Perhaps yes. And certainly as we're seeing, you're right, the delay in the start of families and, people working, later, that average retirement age being pushed. So I think it is kind of a moving target. I wasn't around when at Stay Work Play when it started and why they chose that number in particular, but we like to, I like to joke, my wife and I are both in our mid-40s, and we like to joke that, given the average age in New Hampshire, that we're New Hampshire young. So, maybe we can keep that. But I appreciate the point, and, certainly not to discount, the contributions and, that older Granite Staters have to offer. And, it's funny sometimes, it was on panels, certainly pre-COVID, on a lot of panels, it seemed, with my counterpart at the AARP of New Hampshire, and people would often think that that like we were like in diametric opposition to each other, that it was like young versus old, and that but we quickly came to the conclusion, and like to bang the drum, that like, look, a lot of the things that young people want and desire in a place are the same things that that older people want and desire in their communities. We all want better public transportation. We want more walkable communities. We want these types of opportunities and amenities that we have a lot more in common than we do in opposition. So looking at it is not that kind of adversarial lens, but how can we all work together, and knowing too that as it relates to young people in particular, again, it's not that we're, Stay Work Play. Our mission is certainly, the attraction and retention of young people, because, we need, more young people, again, to step up into those roles. So for us, our mission is to make the environment more conducive here in New Hampshire for young people to stay, work, and play, to be able to live their lives, to be able to afford to live their lives, and have a life that they want, that is satisfying and meaningful to them here in New Hampshire. And I think a lot of the things that we're advocating for, benefit everyone too. When we're advocating for housing affordability, for example, and childcare, it allows young people to stay here. And you know what that means? They don't have to move away. They can be closer. Grandparents can be closer to their grandkids, and a host of other benefits there as well. That's kind of a long, rambling answer, and I apologize if I didn't answer it fully or satisfactorily.
Well, Ken has said it's a good answer, so you have the mark of approval from our
All right.
demographer. But last month we had Kelly Nye-Lengerman from the Institute on Disability speak, and of course there's the concept of universal design, and that's what your comment reminded me of here. If we can make community living easier on one particular group, it often has spillover effects to others. And you sit within, or tell me about your relationship with the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, because ostensibly that department is also doing for the 40 and 50 and 70 and 80 year olds what you are doing at this at the focus on the on the 20 to 40 age range, or certainly for those who are still working age and starting and working at businesses. So what is the relationship between you and the department bureau, and and how do you see that shifting going forward at all?
Sure. I would say the relationship is very collaborative. It's something that, here in New Hampshire, I kind of mentioned earlier that, we run very lean, here in New Hampshire, and, no one governmental entity, no one nonprofit, no one business or academic institution, I think, has the resources to do everything that needs to be done. And, what, Stay Work Play does in other states, might be handled by like a division of economic development or something like that. But, here in New Hampshire, again, we run lean. So we're, we definitely, see the need. It's not a luxury, it's a need to be able to work together. And we have a lot of, overlapping interest, and recognize that. I mean, they're, working, I think we're working on kind of different ends toward one of the same goals. They're often focused on helping individual businesses thrive here in the state, to attract them and retain them, working with employers to be able to provide those opportunities for the people who live here and the people we need. Whereas Stay Work Play, we're working on maybe the more people side of things, working to make New Hampshire more attractive to the people. Because economic development, as you mentioned, you kind of have an economic development background. So, economic development as an industry has kind of shifted in recent years. It used to be, it was all about trying to lure a company here, and that was New Hampshire's strength for a long time, decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. be able to lure like a Fidelity Investments, for example, come up to Merrimack, build this big campus, 5,000 people, boom, come and, that's like a huge injection of money and talent, into the state. Now it's kind of flipped, where it used to be, attract a company and the workers will follow. Now it's attract the workers and the companies will follow. So that's kind of where we're in that space of working to make New Hampshire more attractive, to young workers, so that, the businesses that are here existing will stay here, and that new ones might look up and say, oh, wow, look at all these people, here in New Hampshire, this, high talent, highly educated workforce, could be beneficial to us. But that's not going to happen until, we have more housing that's affordable, that we have more childcare, and all of these types of things. So it's a long way of saying that, we kind of work, collaboratively, certainly. And, sometimes that will be, advocating for the same bills in the legislature. Others, it will be, kind of raising up and talking about, issues, to employers, and kind of hitting the same points from different points of view, as well is certainly helpful.
Christine points out that younger people need to attend planning board meetings to talk about the need for affordable housing options. And we see that in our town as well. Harkens back to our conversation about obstacles or barriers to community involvement related to work schedules or childcare or inadequate transportation, but also this lack of information or knowing how to begin. I see this in our own community work. Where do I spend my limited amount of time that has the most leverage in something that is at a tipping point of happening or not happening, instead of putting my efforts to something, a cause that's dead in the water or automatically going to happen, or it's just not in a state of potential for my voice to make a difference. Have you seen good practice, or do you have recommendations for how to let young people, like how to create the information pipeline from those who really do know where those ripe opportunities are, to the groups that can have very little time but could really move the needle on the outcome?
Yeah, well, I think, it starts with, letting people know, how the process works. And, that's, perhaps part, civic education, as to, what is the role of planning and zoning boards, and how does that affect, because so much of, housing development, is at the local level, knowing what role, organizations and boards like that play. And then, again, being intentional and making those asks, I think, not just assuming that, A, everybody knows how it works, and B, that they're just going to, show up and lend their voice in support of, say, a particular project, or, maybe even join, the planning board. And I mean, it doesn't help. Like, let's be honest too, that like, address your reality as it is. Like, when most people hear the words planning board and, land use policy and zoning board, like a snooze fest. It's boring. It's not sexy. As maybe going to a rally of some kind, or something with a little bit more excitement, when we're talking about, how much frontage is required and parking requirements, and like, geez, just talking about it makes my eyes, sleepy. So being able to acknowledge that, but really talk about the importance and getting out, at Stay Work Play, we've certainly talked about working to get more young people involved, in the political process, both running for office, in a nonpartisan fashion from our standpoint, but also, land use boards, and being able to share those kind of testimonials. And, it's something that I know a few other organizations are working at, as well, particularly on the housing affordability front, but it's getting out there, it's education, it's sharing information, young people sharing stories who are involved, and ultimately helping to connect the dots and hold people's hands to get them from point A to point B, to realize just how important it is. And, trying to lower those barriers too, because you're right. If these meetings are happening at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night, like, if I have kids, I have to, get them fed. Is their homework done? Have they taken their shower yet? All of these things, I don't have time to, go sit and wait and, oh, this is number 23 on the agenda. When is it going to happen? I don't know. Will it, happen within 5 minutes or, 3 hours? Who knows? I mean, there's so many real barriers, beyond just people not even knowing what's going on and how important it is.
Right. And if you choose, if your family wants to be involved to make a difference, and you have one night every 6 months to go share your voice, what is that issue going to be?
Correct. Yeah, you're triaging this and what's most important to you. And one of the things that I'm still kind of sad to have seen it gone away. From the legislative standpoint. Back during COVID. Don't wish for a return of those days, but being able to give remote testimony.
Right.
I thought was great. People could just log in. Because who has the opportunity to go to Concord at 11 o'clock on a random Wednesday morning and sit again for God knows how long till your turn to go. But if you could do it from home, and I think the same way, if local planning and zoning boards could allow that type of remote testimony, or even you'd be able to more than just shoot an email too, but being able to even record a little video to be able to be played at the time, so that people can do it on their schedules, not on the planning board schedule.
And Jada brings up a good point. Unfortunately, in some communities, local politics and committees have reputations of being hostile and unfriendly environments. Not a great way to feel more connected and embedded in one's home community. And having been on both sides of that personally, both on a board where someone comes in and wants to make change without an understanding of the process and what has happened before, and trying to be heard by an organization that has such a calcified, to use one of your words earlier, history, that can be really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, if these things were easy, they would have been solved by now, but they're not, and they're complicated, but we still have to keep working toward them.
So we are nearly at the end of our time, and Will, I wanted to give you the last word on Stay Work Play's direction. Where would you like to see the organization go to better achieve this vision?
Well, it's that's the question that Stay Work Play is answering right now and working toward. Our board of directors is taking the data that we've learned here in this survey, still kind of analyzing it. We're going to be going out across the state in the coming months to talk to young people around the state, to get kind of more anecdotal data and stories to go along with this, and then really kind of taking it all in and figuring it out within the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years in our next strategic planning process. What do we want Stay Work Play to focus on, again, with our limited resources, bandwidth, staff, money, all of these things? What's going to make the most impact? I certainly think that I think it's safe to say we're still going to be focusing on a lot of these big issues that affect the attraction and retention of young people. From a policy standpoint, I think housing will continue to be number one. Childcare, that's something that I've mentioned it a few times, but is really kind of skyrocketed. That we've heard, again, hard data like in the survey, and just anecdotally being a major challenge for young people. So I think that will be an increasing focus for the organization. And then, to kind of the point we're just talking about, working, to try to find more ways, to get more young people involved in life in New Hampshire, civically, communally, otherwise. And then I saw a comment in the, in the chat earlier, didn't have a chance to talk about, but working to get, to have a more targeted focus area on or focus on high school students. Knowing that, again, 2 out of 3 that, want that bachelor's degree are leaving. What can we do on the front end, to talk about those opportunities and, hear more and address more of their concerns? I mean, that comes with challenges too. They're minors, and being able to, to engage is a little bit more challenging than it is with those 18 plus, but is super important for the long-term, impact of attracting and retaining young people here in New Hampshire.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we'll have you back to share the evolution of your work here. Thank you so much. We're actually looking at workforce from a different angle. Next month, we'll be looking at human trafficking and labor exploitation, something that doesn't get a ton of visibility in New Hampshire, but is here nonetheless. Hope that everyone on this call will be able to join us next month on November 8th, I believe it is, and second Wednesday of the month. And again, if you have further thoughts on how to shape this discussion series going forward, do let me know. Will, is it all right for us to post your presentation on the Carsey site?
Certainly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.